Hey guys, it's Zach. So around this time last year, before Sword and Shield's release, and after we got news of the cut of the national dex from the new games, I decided to look into every Pokemon that has appeared in every regional dex. If you want to check out the original video, I'll have a link in the description. But today, we are going to go back into that list once again and see which Pokemon has been in every regional dex since their first appearance. Now, in my first video, I referred to these Pokemon as evergreen Pokemon. Pokemon that are around, always, and self-renewing during every generation of games. Now, before we get into this, I'll basically be using the same sources from the original video. When I talk about the Pokemon included, I'll be referring to them by their family lines, rather than listing out each individual Pokemon one by one, unless there's one Pokemon from that line that's included while the others are left out. I'd also like to say that I'm focusing on the first game of that region. Some third games and generations like to add some Pokemon into the game, and I will say that I'm excluding 5th gen Unova Dex due to the fact that Unova Dex only included 5th gen Pokemon in the first entry into the series. I also want to let you know that when I'm looking into regional dex appearances, I'm looking for just the regional dex appearances. I know that some Pokemon have been kicked from the list, but are returning via updates are the DLC, Isle of Armor, and Crown Tundra. So, for example, the Alolan starters don't have a dex number. They're allowed in the games, but they don't have a dex number. This means they cannot be included into the list. So, let's get into it. Is your favorite Pokemon a Pokemon that can always be found? Or is it a rare find that makes it more special to you? Let's take a look. Now, when we first looked at this list, Sword and Shield was yet to be released, so we didn't know which one of these Alolan Pokemon would be included or excluded. Today, we can actually look to see which Pokemon were included. These lines include the Vikavolt line, the Serena line, the Mudsdale line, the Beware line, Wishiwashi, Pukumuku, Rabombi line, Araquanid line, Golisopod line, Salazzle line, Mimikyu, Shiinotic line, Oranguru and Passimian, Drampa, Turtonator, Togedemaru, Dhelmise, Type Null, and Savalli. And let's not forget the Kommo-o line. It's a pretty long list and it makes sense. For those who may have jumped on the Pokemon Go hype train and Sun and Moon was their re-entry or start into the main series of games, it would be some Pokemon that these people are comfortable with. Not to mention, at the time of Sword and Shield's release, Alolan merchandise was still being sold until they phased into more Sword and Shield merch, so it's a good idea to keep those Pokemon a little more relevant. Now, let's move on to Generation 6, the Kalos Dex. Before Sword and Shield, we had 16 Pokemon and 9 family lines to make it to the Alola Dex. Let's see how that compares now when we look at the Galar Dex. The Pokemon that are evergreen in Generation 6 are the Pangroa line, Sylveon, Gurja line, Trevenant line, and Norvorn line. And that's it. It's 5 family lines and 10 Pokemon. We only lost 6 Pokemon between the travel to Alola from Alola to Galar. Talonflame has already been confirmed for the DLC, so this isn't too much of a loss. Pokemon like Klefki and Carbink are missing, but I don't know how many people may have noticed. We also lost Zygarde, but most would say its inclusion in Alola was only because of its lost storyline when we didn't get the rumored Pokemon Z. Now looking at Unova Pokemon that has joined every regional dex. Before Sword and Shield, this list had 13 Pokemon. Now it only includes the Gigalith line, the Garbodor line, and the Vanillix line. So this list went from 13 Pokemon down to 8 Pokemon. Now the Crocodile line and Emolga has already been confirmed for the DLC, but so far we've only lost Alomomola. It's interesting to see that we come across our first Pokemon on this list that has a Gigantamax form, coming from Garbodor. Now we're jumping into the Sinnoh Dex. Now in my original video, I noticed that some of the Pokemon on this list were mostly Pokemon that had evolution lines tied outside of Sinnoh. So it's interesting to see what Pokemon may have remained in every dex since. Those Pokemon include the Drifblim line, Bonsly, Munchlax, Lucario line, Weavile, Leafeon, and Glaceon. So looking at this list again, we went from 15 Pokemon before Sword and Shield down to 9, which isn't a bad decrease, but out of those 9 Pokemon, 5 of them have connections to other Pokemon from other regions, making their inclusion a little easier. Only the Drifblim and Lucario line is the only pure Sinnoh line of Pokemon on this list. Now we've seen some additions of more Sinnoh Pokemon to the DLC, but seeing how we hear a lot of Sinnoh praise, it's a surprise on how there are only so few Pokemon from Sinnoh that have appeared in every regional deck since. And now Hoenn. Hoenn was the home of the original National Dex cut. With the transition from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance system, it left a lot of Pokemon before Hoenn stuck in the past. This was one of the reasons why we saw the remakes of Red and Blue with Leaf Green and Fire Red games. So before Sword and Shield, we saw 6 Pokemon from Hoenn appear in every dex. After Sword and Shield, we only saw the Pelipper line and the Wishcast line. I'd like to also state that Absol was previously on this list and will come back when the DLC hits, so the only Pokemon we lost from our journey from Alola to Galar was the Nosepass line. So I can't say this is that big of a loss, but it brings up the conversation on whether this list was too small to begin with. So, like I said before, Hoenn and the move to the Game Boy Advance created the first National Dex cut, causing the first Hoenn Dex to have a limit on how many of the previous Pokemon they were letting in. Because of this, the only Pokemon from the Johto region that we see in every dex is Pichu. Pichu is the only Pokemon from the Johto dex that has seen inclusion in every dex since. And does this even count when the Pokemon is from the family line of the franchise's mascot? The only Pokemon that was on this list before our move to Galar was the Crobat line. Being that Zubat is the cave troll of the Pokemon world, it was nice to have a game where you didn't have to deal with it. But I will like to add that Crobat has been confirmed to come back in the DLC. Seeing this list, it's a bummer because Gen 2, Gold and Silver were my favorite games, with Tyranitar being my all-time favorite Pokemon. The Tyranitar family line always gets decent coverage, especially with it being in Sword and Shield, but it seems that Gen 2 Pokemon get the least amount of regional inclusion when creating games. So now we're to the list where it all began, the Kanto region. I can already hear people complain about Gen 1 pandering, but I think this list shows as much as Kanto gets recognized in the media, the merchandise, and the movies, it's treated the same way most generations do when it comes to building a regional dex. Now, before Sword and Shield, there were 9 family lines, which included 21 Pokemon. But after we pop open our Galar decks, we can see that the only ones that remained as evergreen Pokemon were the Pikachu line, the Machamp line, the Seakick line, and the Gyarados line. So it's great to see that they cut down this list just as much as the other larger list of evergreen Pokemon. Pikachu and Machamp are the only next Pokemon on this list to get Gigantamax forms. It's interesting to see which Pokemon have always been there for you in your adventures throughout each region. Were you surprised after hearing it? This time I won't talk about the percentage of the National Dex is included because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Each game gives you a new area to explore, new Pokemon to discover. So older Pokemon returning is nice, but don't forget to open your eyes to new ideas and new Pokemon. It's great to see that there are only 3 Pokemon on this list that have received Gigantamax forms. 4 if you count Munchlax's connection to Snorlax. But I think this means that they're giving more Pokemon that aren't in every game their time to shine. But that's all I have for today. I wanted to do this before the DLC came out so we could look at the Galar Dex as a regional dex in itself, comparing it to the rest of the regional dex. So when this comes out, there are lots of things we can discuss in the comments below. Let me know how you feel about this list, and are you excited for the DLC? I would love to have a conversation with you down in the comments below. While you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe, because I'm going to do a Let's Play of the DLC as soon as it comes out. So keeping subscribed, you can join me and more adventures. I'm Zach, and I'll see you guys in the next one.